Hello, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us right here. Well, not in the studios of ABS Television today. We're at the Sir John E. St. Louis Finance and Conference Center. Time now for the post-cabinet media briefing. Cabinet having met yesterday. Of course, the signal issue that was discussed would have been what happened on Tuesday morning, in the wee hours of the morning. It's about 20 nautical miles south of St. Kitts. The boat tragedy, the capsizing and sinking of a vessel with Antiguans and West African nationals on that vessel. So here with us, here at the Sir John E. St. Louis Finance and Conference Center, is the Minister for Information, Honorable Melford Nicholas, and he's flanked by members or the heads of the country's security services. So of course, they'll be answering several questions from journalists who have gathered here to ask about the latest unfolding situation. So without any further ado, over to Minister Nicholas. Of course, you'll also have comments from members of the security forces. Then we'll have questions later. Minister Nicholas.
Yes, good morning, and thank you all for coming and to be present here at this venue. That based on the short notice that state media was given, it became infeasible for us to have that the appropriate point in time indicate how many media houses we have here present this morning. As indicated, the core issue that was discussed at Cabinet yesterday, amongst others, but certainly that took the most of the Cabinet's time, was a discussion as to what took place in the wee hours of Tuesday morning when it was discovered that a marine vessel had reported an SOS condition, which was picked up by one of the security forces, and it turned out that they had been transporting persons from the shores of Antigua to another jurisdiction in the Caribbean. It turns on that as well that there had been, it has been discovered that a number of persons who are from West African descent were on that craft. And so clearly it had a link towards an issue that had been a part of our discourses before. I would just like to take the first 4 or 5 minutes to just outline in brief synopsis the other issues that were discussed at Cabinet yesterday. We would have looked at changes to the tax code with respect to an issue that came out of the Prime Minister's budget statement, to wit the increase in the property taxes for luxury properties over $3 million. So we would have consulted with the members of the Inland Revenue Department, and they would have given us their responses and have given us some direction in terms of some legislative changes that may be required to be completed before the November period, when the new tax measures would obviously come into being. We also had discussions with some members of the armed forces in relation to a proposed change to our high value residency program that will be operated under the Ministry of Finance through the Inland Revenue Department. We always had a residency program, but there have been some recommendations to improve upon that, and we had the presentations from 2 principals within the state of Antigua and Barbuda and some consultants looking at establishing our high value residency program along the lines that it has been established in Canada and other similar jurisdictions, to bolster the revenue intake, of course, at the Inland Revenue Department, and to bring us up in line with other high-value residency programs that are operational across the globe. We had as well some other discussions with within the agricultural sector, and of course we would have looked at the challenges that we continue to face with the production of potable water for the entire state. That having been said, the major issue that confronts us now is the issue which I alluded to at the beginning. I wanted to take the opportunity, because the government remains transparent in this process. The members here present would have given the government as detailed as possible an indication of the status of play. In a moment I will ask the Chief of the Defense Services to outline what has been gleaned so far. I imagine between last night and this morning there would have been further developments that I will ask the Chief of Defense, insofar as he can indicate what those developments may be, to include that as well in the briefing this morning. But the background to all of this started with the objectives that the government of Antigua and Barbuda, indeed CARICOM, had with establishing air routes between Africa and the Caribbean. These discussions would have gone back as far as 5 years ago. And within that envelope, we had made arrangements to set up these air links between West Africa and the Caribbean. In fact, not only Antigua, but Barbados as well, through the country of Ghana, would have sought to establish air routes. As part of that objective and those initiatives, once the air services agreement were put in place between Nigeria and Antigua, we had in fact an overture made by a particular investor out of Nigeria that indicated that he wanted to set up the first airline. We certainly had an engagement with Air Peace, which we still continue to have discourses with Air Peace about air links and about air travel within the Caribbean. We are in discussions with them at the moment related to equity participation in LEA 2020. But in consequence of establishing that air link between Antigua and Nigeria, and as of November of last year, when the first chartered aircraft came, bearing the banner of Antigua Airways, that was subsequently to be followed by another charter group. And of course, what was unknown to the principals here in Antigua is that there was certainly a need and a demand for persons moving out of Cameroon to be able to find solace or hospice in another jurisdiction. So once that was discovered, and we realized then that the objective of establishing an air route and airline route between West Africa and Antigua, it was discovered that it was being abused, and so we shuttered off those charter flights. The objective still remains that we want to set up economic linkages between ourselves and West Africa. We still want to be able to establish commercial operations between us and they. We still want to be able to open up that route for normal travel, for tourism. Nigeria remains one of the richest countries in Africa, and we see that there is a historical heritage link between us and they. And so therefore those objectives remain. But in the meantime, we have to deal with the consequences. We have disclosed that there were some 600 and odd persons who remain stranded here in Antigua as a result of what transpired in December. And notwithstanding that, the government did give its indication that we remain open to the options of those persons who would wish to go back. We would facilitate them by organizing a closed charter for them to return. And those who wish to stay, we would certainly move on a humanitarian gesture to facilitate them, to try and see how we can facilitate a legal path for them to be able to become fully legal residents, and certainly to come to grips with their particular situation. Having regard to all of that, we took the further step of inviting the IMO and the UNHCR, both dealing with the whole question of migration and refugees. The IMO is on island today, and I believe later on they will be facilitated by the Immigration Department in terms of visiting some of the clusters of West Africans who are here on island. And just wanted to say that there has been some social reaction and responses to the government's intention of facilitating them here. By and large, I think that the general population have been hospitable, has been responsive, but clearly there has been some rhetoric, some of it political, some of it, I suppose, just the normal spasmodic reaction of persons who are not yet on board with the idea that these are our West African brothers and sisters and cousins, and we are to open up our hearts in a humanitarian way to accommodate them. Many of them have indicated that they felt unwelcome and the environment was not hospitable, and on their own volition, it seems that they have taken a decision to risk life and limb and to try to find other environs. Perhaps maybe the ultimate aim is to move towards a jurisdiction that they always had their sights on. This is a part of human history. Many persons in the Caribbean, and certainly in Antigua and Leewards, would know that in the 60s and 70s there was a massive movement of OECS persons into the U.S. Virgin Islands. I've certainly played cricket, and when Parish League cricket was at its helm, and they were touring teams, when they got into the United States, there are a number of cricketers who abandoned the team and never came back. So the whole idea of human migration, it's a part of lived history. The entire Caribbean is replete with a number of instances where this has happened. Anyone who studies the recent history of the Caribbean would know of the Cuban boat lift crisis. Even the other day in 2019, when we had the issue of the hurricane in the Bahamas, we learned that there were a number of Haitian migrants who had been there, and we continue to hear of the massive number of persons who continue to use these unlawful means of entering borders because they are choosing to move towards better lives and climes. So this is not a unique situation, and to the extent that we have now found our brothers and sisters who came here through those flights, who we have given hospice, and they have still made it a decision to try to move to other jurisdictions, is what we're here to uncover. And I'm hoping that at the end of the discussions this morning, that some clarity will be brought to the whole proceedings. Having said all of that, and I've sketched the background, I would invite Commander Benjamin of the Defense Services to start the proceedings. And of course, I'm sure he will invite the other colleagues who are part of the national security arrangements, and including the head of customs and the head of immigration to chip in where necessary. Commander?
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. Good morning, all. What I will attempt to do this morning is to give a general overview of all that we from a defense force, in particular Coast Guard standpoint, has seen throughout the episode. I will chronicle it based on information we received through our operations center, and from there, where partners have information to support it, or otherwise they can contribute as well. As it relates to what is ongoing, on the morning of the 28th at about 2:03 a.m., the Defense Force Operations Center received a call from the Regional Maritime Rescue Coordination Center in Martinique, indicating that a vessel had capsized approximately 45 miles northwest of Antigua and Barbuda with 30 persons on board, and they are requesting assistance. At 3:22 a.m. of the same day, our operations center was in contact with the St. Kitts Nevis Coast Guard, seeking information regarding the same incident, recognizing that the incident had happened just about between 15 and 20 nautical miles off the coast of St. Kitts. At that time, St. Kitts Coast Guard indicated that they deployed Coast Guard vessels at 3:32 a.m. we had St. Kitts Coast Guard stated that SV Genevieve had picked up 16 persons. 16 persons, water, one of which was unresponsive at the time. At 8:30 a.m. on the same morning, the Rescue Coordination Center called the Coast Guard and indicated to us, that is the Antigua Coast Guard, and indicated to us to stand fast with our vessels, since there are a number of vessels unseen, and they do not want to cluster the search area. At 8:45 a.m., ABSAR, that's the local search and rescue body, contacted Coast Guard, offering assistance to help with the case. At 8:52 a.m., the Air Wing was contacted with the information from the Maritime Rescue Center requesting assistance to support a possible deployment. At 9:44, we were contacted by external agencies from Antigua and Barbuda, asking to verify whether personnel from the United States or any other foreign country was involved or was a part of the group found in the waters. At 9:57 a.m., ABSAR was contacted by Coast Guard Base and was informed of their preparation to deploy a helicopter at 2 p.m. of the said afternoon under the advisory of the Rescue Coordination Center. At 10:29 a.m., Coast Guard Base was contacted by MRCC and asked to ask them if they needed any aerial assistance in regard to the search for the capsized vessel. MRCC reported that there were already 2 passenger vessels in the area, and we should remain on standby. That is, the Antigua Barbuda Defense Force Coast Guard as well as ABSA should remain on standby to support. We followed up at 11 o'clock, contacting the St. Kitts Coast Guard for an update. They had no new information at that time. At 1:09 p.m., Coast Guard contacted ABSA for a time in which they would be deploying. However, they were contacted by MRCC and also told to stand down and await further information from them. At 15:21, MRCC was contacted for an update, and they stated that they will be deploying an aircraft at 4 p.m. to fly over. They also asked for Coast Guard if there was an asset available to deploy at the time. At this time, that is 3:21, MRCC confirmed that the vessel was a French registered vessel named La Belle Michelle II. At 3:25 p.m., Coast Guard contacted the MRCC, informing them that an asset was available to deploy and was awaiting for their search pattern. That vessel subsequently deployed at 4:15 p.m. in the afternoon. At 4:40, St. Kitts Coast Guard and MRCC was contacted and notified that an asset from Antigua and Barbuda Coast Guard was on its way. At 5:15, the MRCC indicated that 2 merchant vessels, that is Tom Louise and Seabourn Ovation, are on scene, and they also are continuing the search. On the 29th at 8:30 a.m. on the 29th, the last update from St. Kitts was that 16 persons were rescued and 3 bodies were recovered from the water at that time. Since then, the ABDF have continued to support the operations through the means of coordination, and yesterday afternoon we deployed a vessel at 4 p.m. That returned here, at 1 p.m., sorry, and it returned here just around 7 p.m. last night. No further developments from the scene. My most recent contacts with the commander of the St. Kitts Defense Force this morning indicated that the search continues and will continue throughout the course of the day. Those are the facts as we have it.
Thank you very much, Commander. I'll now invite the Chief of Police, the Commissioner of Police, to indicate where we are with respect to the investigation and in respect to any laws that may have been breached insofar as he's able to disclose. Commissioner.
Thank you very much, Minister, and good morning to one and all. Having heard of the report at the early stage of the morning, what the police force did is created an investigative team, because just as the information was coming out, we got that type of information that the boat involved in the incident left Antigua. So we created an investigative team immediately the morning, comprising officers from the Criminal Investigation Department. They came together in terms of seeking information as to what are the circumstances leading to that boat leaving Antigua, if in fact that boat left Antigua. The team came together, started to work, and then at 10:46, there was a report made at Boland's Police Station by the gentleman by the name of Alex Lamotte of St. Rose, Guadeloupe, who reported that he came to Antigua on that same fishing boat mentioned earlier from the Chief of Defense Staff, La Belle Michelle II. It's a blue exterior boat, orange on the inside. It's about 10.6 meters long and 2.5 meters wide, with 2 wide Suzuki 250 engine. And he reported that he came to Antigua on the 25th, and on the morning of the 28th, somewhere around 8:30, he discovered the boat missing. So we started to investigate that report that was made by him. He was interviewed, and several pieces of information was gathered from him, and then we immediately started to speak to our colleagues in St. Kitts. So we have been in dialogue with the investigators in St. Kitts as to the circumstances, if this boat was in Antigua and then reported missing, how it get over there. What we have done so far is gather as much information in terms of when the boat came, and in the initial stage of the investigation, we can verify the boat actually came to Antigua as a fishing vessel, came in on the 25th, and there is information as to when it left the Jolly Harbor area. The information you have, when it left, there was no other persons than 2 individuals was moving the boat. From the information that is coming from St. Kitts in our dialogue, out of the 16 persons that were rescued, 2 of them are Antiguans, and they now are being interviewed. The 2 Antiguans are being interviewed in terms of the circumstances of how they get to Antigua. So as we speak, there are interviews being conducted with them, because they are also trying to figure out what circumstances that led them to be part of the group that was found. So that is where we are. The report, the individual, the owner of the boat, Mr. Lamotte, he is still with the police, speaking to the police in terms of providing additional information. And we are in direct contact with our colleagues in St. Kitts as they conduct their interviews with the Cameroonians and the Antiguans that were found on the boat. The investigative team is also speaking to other regional partners as to what might be happening on the regional scene. So that is where we are at this moment, trying to figure out what are the circumstances with that boat leaving Antigua, where did it left from. There is a lot of speculation, and persons are identifying a village, saying Erlins it left from. We have not confirmed that, but we are also using this opportunity to seek any additional information the public might have to assist us in the investigation. Because the initial information we have, and we have credible information when the boat was leaving the Jolly Harbor area, it had no other passengers than 2 individuals who looked like the 2 captains taking the boat away from that area. So in terms of if those persons boarded the boat in Antigua, which area, we are not sure, and anyone who have that type of information that can assist us would be greatly appreciated.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. I'll now invite the chairman of the heads of our law enforcement group, Colonel Croft, who is himself the senior officials at the ONDCP, to give further comments on this particular issue. Colonel Croft.
Thank you very much, Minister. Good morning to the audience. First of all, I would like to express sympathies on the loss of life to the individuals who took that trip. The loss of life is always regretted. My comments are very brief this morning because I wanted to bring clarity to the issue of the difference between human trafficking and migrant smuggling. I note in the media, I note that while a number of individuals would communicate and speak, they often intermix both terms. And it is important that as we are measured against how those 2 particular issues are managed, it is important that we make a distinction between what is considered as human trafficking and what we consider as migrant smuggling. And so human trafficking involves the exploitation of men, women, and children for the purpose of forced labor or commercial exploitation. And so the individuals themselves do not necessarily have a choice. They are forced into doing the particular activity. But on the other hand, migrant smuggling is really focusing on the provision of a service to facilitate the movement of a people from one place to the other, often through the system of illegal entry into another state or another particular location. And I thought it important that we make that distinction, and to say that from all the reports that we have seen, we have not seen any instances of what we would refer to as human trafficking. Yes, as the minister said, that there are issues of migration throughout the region, and that has been happening for quite some time. As people seek to go to greener pastures, they often engage in certain activities. And we continue to support our other law enforcement partners in the pursuit of establishing the facts so that, one, we're better prepared to cope with subsequent attempts and eventualities. Two, to hold those accountable who may be involved in any illegal or illicit activities, and ensuring that our borders remain secure as practically as possible. And so just wanted to bring clarity to those two particular issues, and once again regret the loss of life. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you very much, Colonel. I'm going to invite the head of our immigration service to speak to an issue, because there has been sharing of information between her counterparts in St. Kitts, because the identity of the persons who were found, who were rescued from the waters, had to be established, and I would wish for her to speak and address, insofar as she's able to at this stage, what is the level of collaboration and what is the level of information that they have been able to discern and to establish the identity of those persons that have been found, and how does this bring further clarity to the position that we're now in. Ms. Yewood?
Thank you, Minister. Pleasant good morning to all. Is that better? Okay, pleasant good morning to all. With respect to the information that the Department of Immigration has, I can confirm that I have been in direct contact with my counterpart in St. Kitts, Chief Hughes, who has been able to shed some light on some statistics, namely the passengers that were on the vessel. So in terms of statistics, there were 16 passengers. Is it better? Okay. It was 16 passengers that were retrieved from the waters of St. Kitts. Out of the 16, 3 are deceased. There's 2 male Cameroonians and 1 female Cameroonian. 14 in total are Cameroonians that would have been here in December based on the Antigua Airways initiative. So immigration has been able to confirm that. With respect to any other fatalities, to date, haven't tried to speak to the chief this morning. There have been no further updates as it relates to deaths. So, to confirm, 16 are alive. Out of the 16, 14 are Cameroonian, 3 are deceased.
Thank you very much. And of course, I'll invite Mr. Badu to speak to the issue in relation to customs and excise. Mr. Badu.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Minister. Good morning. My colleagues have really covered a lot of details. The only thing I want to add is that La Belle Michelle 2, captained by Alex Lamotte from Guadeloupe, just checked into Antigua waters at 15:20 hours on 25th March. It's a blue fiberglass fishing boat of the same description as the Commissioner has indicated, that 10.65 meter long and 2.55 meter wide. It has a draft of up to 1.2 meters. So I can confirm that that boat never got cleared out, meaning under the law, whenever the boat leaving our shores, they need to check with customs and get the clearance. It was never cleared out. That's from our customs side. Thank you.
Mr. Burford, I invite you to moderate the rest of the proceedings. Questions?
Sure. Thank you, Minister, and thanks to the officials as well. So, of course, for those who are joining us on television and on Facebook Live, as well as on radio, you have heard from Minister Nicholas. Minister Nicholas is Minister for Information. Colonel Tilbert Benjamin is Chief of Defense Staff. Also heard from Police Commissioner Atlee Rodney, OLCP Director. That's Lieutenant Colonel Edward Croft. course, this ONDCP's Office of National Drug and Money Laundering Control Policy. Chief Immigration Officer is Katrina Yearwood, and the Comptroller of Customs is Roger Perdue. So there are my colleagues here from various media houses, and there's one independent journalist. And actually, for transparency and fairness, I'll actually ask them to go first, and then I'll ask my questions at the end. So let me start with Robert Emmanuel. We'll ask that we pretty much have a time frame of about another hour left. So we'll ask that each person asks 3 questions. We will do another rotation to see once we have more time, and then we'll be able to go ahead. All right. So Robert Emmanuel is with Observer Media Group.
Good morning. My first question is a general one to the Information Minister. Why isn't the Prime Minister or the Attorney General sitting where you are sitting to answer questions from the media as it relates to this matter, especially since it's such a high-profile and important matter? Shouldn't both of them, or at least one of them, be talking?
I think the question answers itself. This is the regular part of Cabinet press briefing, and this has been a task that has been entrusted to myself and the Chief of Staff over the years. And the information that is before you, it's bona fide information. I'm here with all of the persons. There is no secrecy about what the government is hoping to achieve. And it falls to me to be able to fulfill this role. So I think the question with respect is perhaps maybe a bit redundant. It really wouldn't matter. There have been occasions where I have been absent from the state, I've been unable to attend, and in the past another minister from the cabinet would be able to fulfill these responsibilities. So I think the responsibility was delegated to me, and I believe that I'm equipped to be able to answer the questions.
All right. In the cabinet notes, it suggested that several of the West African migrants would have essentially gone on this incident because of, quote, hostility towards them by angry people. Is the cabinet note suggesting that the opposition or persons in the public space are responsible for this sort of incident? Especially, was it not known by the government that these were migrants who were seeking safe refuge and would have eventually left the country at some point? And is the government trying to somehow argue that these 30 migrants would have... Oh, better? Okay. Is the government trying to somehow argue that these 30 or so migrants would have taken such a risky move as going in the dead of night on a small 30-feet boat because of, quote, angry people?
Far from that. I think the contrast that I drew was that the vast majority of persons that we know have been hospitable, and they have responded to the need to provide that type of comfort and assurance. I think in some instances, persons who have come here, who were a part of that group of 600 stranded persons, have been given a degree of hospitality, whereupon they have been even provided with jobs by a number of businesses. But they have also told a tale in the background, and I think it's critical for us to understand the conditions that may have led them to take a decision, a riskful decision, to go to other lands and climes. They have told a story of some in hospitality, and they have also told a story of areas where they have been exploited. They have lived in clustered environments, and they have been told, we have been told, that much of what has happened to them, they have been, by some persons, exploited them insofar as rent and other measures are concerned. And so it is sufficient to say that notwithstanding the government's decision to provide them with a legal means of staying here, that all may not have been well with them. And in consequence, they may have been motivated to seek greener pastures. It's not a question of trying to extricate anyone or trying to place blame. That is just the reality of what we're dealing with. We have gone the further step to say that we have invited the IMO and UNHCR to be here, who have vast experiences in dealing with persons who would consider themselves as being on the siege or being in an unsafe environment from whence they came. And so the IMO is here today, it's on ground today, and they will begin that process of consultation and discussion with the persons so affected, facilitated, of course, by one or more of our law enforcement agencies. But the government is not casting any blame and aspersions. I was only giving you information to indicate some of what we have learned thus far. It's a multifaceted issue, and that's going to continue to affect our discourses in respect of this particular development.
And my final question this round. Over the weekend, the Prime Minister was heard reportedly saying that Antigua Airways is practically a defunct entity because they have been the government has been burnt. Is the Prime Minister or the government conceding that Antigua Airways, which is essentially a company that is started by a company that has no experience in the aviation industry, and the only thing that really, essentially they only have money, was it a bad idea in the first place to essentially create Antigua Airways? And what are the lessons learned from this situation?
In any pioneering environment, you're operating at the forefront, the front end, and there are going to be risks. There are going to be unknown risks and outcomes in relation to any pioneering experience. And to the extent that the first move towards establishing air routes came to this end, would be an indication that this was not unwholesome, full experience. And it's not a question of crying over spilt milk, it's to accept the reality as it has been presented. I indicated earlier that we are still in discussion with an established airline in West Africa from Nigeria, Air Peace, and it is likely that in the foreseeable future that we will reach to some type of collaboration between Air Peace and what we would wish to establish here within the Caribbean with respect to interregional travel as well. So the Prime Minister's assessment in terms of whether or not Antigua Airways can in fact resuscitate itself from the ashes, it's perhaps maybe a fair conclusion. I would only wish to add a footnote to this to indicate that the option that was given to Antigua to be able to retain an equity position in Antigua Airways was a pejorative issue, in the sense that once it was established, we would have facilitated acquiring that equity position based on the use of the instrument in the CIP to allow the use of 10 files to be able to acquire those shares. But that was never actualized, and so we never really subscribed to the equity offer that was made by Antigua Airways.
Thank you, Garfield. Minister. Oh, sorry. Hi, good morning. I'm Zoe Carlton. I'm an independent journalist. Good morning to everybody, and thank you for those briefings and some clarity on a number of cases. But this appears to be quite an organised event. Is this part of a bigger organisation, this migrant smuggling and trafficking?
Colonel Crawford, do you want to attempt to answer?
Okay. Thank you very much for that question, Zoe. As we said, and as the Minister would have alluded to previously, that there is always the attempt by individuals to move amongst various countries and to go to areas where they think that the grass is greener. And so there's always been an attempt by individuals. I won't say that there is a very large problem, but I know that there have been several interceptions in the past with individuals attempting to do that. And so from a law enforcement perspective, we continue to monitor the shores, we continue to monitor the borders, we continue to look at activities that would suggest that there is nefarious activities occurring, whether or not it's in relation to the movement of drugs, contrabands, or people. It's all a part of that overall national security architecture to ensure that we maintain safe borders and that our people continue to be safe and secure. I'm not certain whether Chief of Defense Staff would wish to provide some additional clarity based on the occurrences of interceptions, even from the movement of West Africa coming towards Antigua, where they have intercepted or they have realized a number of assets, well, not assets, but incidents that would have occurred. And so that is the answer. Chief of Defense Staff?
Thank you very much, Colonel Croft. This particular incident is the second for us within the ABDF, in particular the Coast Guard, for the year. If you recall, there was an incident early in January where I believe it was 15 persons were found on a vessel moving from one location to the next. In addition to that, it is a concern among the regional military chiefs and commissioners of police as to what we see as an increase in flows of persons from outside of the region traveling through the region using various means. So there is an uptick based on our regional collaboration and coordination noticed by all of us. But this is for us the second incident that has occurred during the course of the year where there may be a presence of Antiguans involved in one way or the other.
Thank you. That leads really on to my next question to Commissioner Attlee, Commissioner Rodney. The investigative team is obviously investigating in some depth, as you mentioned. Are we looking into the Antiguan role in this and further than the two gentlemen who are currently in custody?
Yes, presently we are looking at if there are any involvement from the two Antiguans who are in St. Kitts, but also other Antiguans and Barbudans on this side of the jurisdiction, any involvement in the movement of those persons. So we are not just focusing on the two individuals in St. Kitts, but also any other players that might be involved in Antigua and Barbuda.
Thank you. And my final question then, if I may, I think is probably to Ms. Katrina Yearwood, about has this incident precipitated or changed our thoughts about how we handle or how we manage the current Cameroonians and Nigerians who are still here?
I don't think that, thank you, Zoe, I don't think that it has changed how we deal with it. What I would say is that the Department of Immigration is very much looking forward, as you heard from the Honorable Minister earlier, about the international bodies that are coming to assist us. Now, as you heard from Colonel Croft, he indicated that it's not a major issue with the human trafficking or the migrant smuggling that we're seeing on our shores, but there is obviously something that we need to tackle. What I have taken away from this situation particularly is the need for collaborations, not just domestically, but obviously internationally, which we now have because we have actively invited these international agencies to come and assist them because they have the expertise. They would deal with these sorts of themes on a larger scale than Antigua and Barbuda. So I'm happy that we have taken the initiative to tell them, at this juncture, we're inviting you in. You have certain expertise. We are scheduled to meet with them actually on Friday, which is tomorrow, and we'll be taking it from there. So in terms of what immigration has taken away, the need for collaborations, the need for resources, not just with immigration, but for the other entities as well, so we can have them to act as a deterrent. There's certain resources that would be needed, not just immigration, but I'm sure with ABDF as well, if we're talking about, our shores and porous shores of people going out as well. Yes. Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, if I may continue with regard to the question asked, part of the challenge that we are confronted by on a daily basis is the porosity of our borders. I think that is, everybody has heard of it, everybody knows of it. It is a significant challenge. Antigua and Barbuda is also challenged by the fact that our maritime space is more than 110,000 square kilometers. We here in Antigua, we pay very little attention to that, other than the 108 square miles here and what is in Barbuda. We pay very little attention to the fact that our maritime space is 110,000 square kilometers. And the resources to manage, to secure, to maintain safety are very limited. And so for us, it is a case of collaboration at all levels, not only domestically, but also with our regional partners. Because no individual country within this region can handle what we have to handle by itself, and so we pursue an agenda based on collaboration and coordination. But the porosity of our borders also means that we are pursuing an agenda to acquire systems that will support monitoring, systems that will acquire pursuing from a surface, and a system that will acquire us pursuing from an aerial standpoint as well. And what we are building now is an integrated system that would allow us to monitor and to try and prevent occurrences like these in the future.
Thank you.
Good morning, Everton Barnes. I'm with Pointville Communication. I want to start with Ms. Yearwood. Ms. Yearwood, when you spoke earlier, this was the first time we heard of the gender of any of the folks involved. And I was wondering if of the 16 that are in St. Kitts, are they all males or are there some females among them? Can we get some clarity there, please?
I believe there are 3 females that were amongst the group. One, as I indicated earlier, is deceased. So the stats are, out of the 16, as I said, 14 would have been Cameroonian. Most of them comprise of men. I believe it was only 3 females that we were able to confirm that were on that vessel.
And as a follow-up, are there any plans to do a head count? I do, may sound a little raw, but a head count of those who are remaining, the Cameroonians who are here. Earlier, the minister said there were 600 plus. To get a definitive number of how many remain, and whether or not this was the first such voyage, whether or not there were any previous voyage like this.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Brown. As I said, the matter is still fluid and it's still ongoing. But to answer your question, yes, we have a team that is already in place that has been monitoring the numbers, I should say, of the West Africans that are here. So it is not something that is easily done because of our system. It has to be manually cross-checked. So I have Ms. Thomas and our team that are actually here, and they're actively going through the numbers. But it is worth mentioning that although the minister would have alluded to the 600 at a certain time, that number has significantly decreased. Whether it be that the West Africans have left via the normal way, which would be as an official port of entry, or like instances today. And so Ms. Thomas and her team are looking at that, but I can confirm that the numbers are not in the region of 600 at this time.
And my final question, again to you, Ms. Yearwood. The cabinet note spoke of the residency program. I know we introduced it during about the time when we had the pandemic, when it was at its height. Can you give us an indication how it went? How successful was it?
The Nomad Digital
Right.
Yeah, so I know everybody hasn't heard much about it since it started. We started on a high note. We changed the website, as I'm sure you have been informed. So we have a new website with that, which has made it a lot easier for applicants to apply. In terms of any updates, there is an update that it has been extended. So Antigua was the only Caribbean island that had the Nomad Digital Residency Program that would have allowed you to be here for 2 years. Barbados, our other competitors, Dominica, only had it for 1 year. As per the recent cabinet decision, there has been an allowance for an extension of 3 years, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Honorable Minister, I think it's 3 years for the Nomad Digital Program. So that is something that, again, is going to give Antigua an edge over our competitors as well. And we have seen, although the numbers have decreased because the world is opening up and carrying on post-COVID, we still have a steady influx. Majority of our applicants are coming from either the UK, US, and Canada, Canada being in the lead at this time.
Kieran Murdoch from Twin Island Media, and thank the panel for coming out this morning. My first question is to the Minister. Minister Nicholas, several officials, to include the Chief of Staff, Mr. Hurst, the then Immigration Minister, Mr. Chet Green, and the Prime Minister Gaston Brown, would have repeatedly dismissed concerns about the dangers of this situation in November, in December, and in January. And I note that Colonel Croft has this morning done us the benefit of explaining the difference between human trafficking and migrant smuggling. I wonder if you would forgive the public, however, Colonel Croft, for maybe not knowing the difference, as the main issue seemed to have been the fact that you had vulnerable people, many of whom, to speak frankly, appeared to be on hard times, of troubled means, if I could use that phrase, arriving in Antigua and Barbuda on flights, and this became apparent in November. And as I said, Chief of Staff, Prime Minister, then Immigration Minister, concerns were repeatedly dismissed for pretty much 3 months. So my question to the Minister is, are you to admit that those early dismissals were wrong and that the government should have halted these flights sooner?
As soon as it became apparent to us, when we were notified through Caribbean Impacts of the transmigratory patterns of persons coming here and the issues related to the mass migration of persons through Antigua, we brought an immediate halt to the program. I think we suspended the charter flights after it became known that surreptitiously another actor other than the Antigua Airways group would have utilized the charter arrangement and to have brought this matter into full focus. So I don't know if within the 1 month period, where there were some, I believe, 4 flights, Katrina, of 4 flights, 2 being Antigua Airways and the other 2 being the other actor, whether or not there was any attempt by the government to dismiss any concern. I think what we have always rebuffed was the idea that there was any state participation in any willful act of exploiting persons. And I too am thankful that Colonel Croft would have brought some clarity to this issue, because I think it takes away a bit of the political mischief, if you would, from the issue, and we can now focus clearly on what really is at hand here. It's a question of the human endeavor from amongst troubled people to exploit this particular air route that has been established. I'd want to indicate again and to remind the public, I would have done so at a previous juncture. I represent the small constituency of St. John's City East, and within my constituency I have a number of West Africans, to include Ghanaians and Nigerians, who have lived amongst us for a considerable period of time. Many of them have become socially integrated, are providing services to the education sector and other areas of the economy. I know one of my constituents have recently opened a restaurant serving African food on the All Saints Road in the area of the security company, Special Security Services, and the Lower All Saints Road area. I'm saying all of this to say that at an early juncture, when they came to Antigua, they would have utilized transmigratory patterns to be able to come here. One of them told me a few weeks before the elections that when he came here, he arrived here through Germany on Lufthansa, and his other family members came in on Condor. So it is not new that persons would have exploited the opportunities to come and to situate themselves in an environment where they could find greener pastures. This issue, more recent issue that came to us in December, you know, really was a surprise, because we had gone along with the notion that in the first instance it was going to be established as a route for tourism in the first instance. No one on this side of the planning divide would have seen that there would have been issues where persons in Cameroon may have noticed the opportunity to come to a straight flight into Antigua, and then from thence to plan their route outwards. And so this is what we have learned, and we close the opportunity for that to continue to the extent that the government had second-guessed itself as to whether or not we will continue with establishing an air route. We deliberated in it for a while, but we have determined that the objective is still valid, and we will still want to do that. So we are learning from the experience as well, and as I've said, when you're in a pioneering situation, mistakes will be made. Risks will be unknown, and to the extent that they have become clear to us now, we have a better opportunity in going forward. And I just again want to reiterate, just like you have done, our courtesies and our thanks to Colonel Croft for bringing some clarity to this particular issue.
I have a follow-up question for the Chief Immigration Officer, if I could. And it's along the same lines. In November and December, there were multiple news reports, even in early January, that catalogued that those who were arriving were seeking to migrate. I mean, that became quite apparent rather early on. And I believe that the announcement that flights had been halted came on January 26, if I'm not incorrect, but I stand to be corrected on that matter. So my question is, at any point in November or even December, did you recommend to the government that flights be halted?
Yes, there was a recommendation. At that particular time, I think near enough after December, there was several recommendations that were put, and I am pleased that they were received.
In December or January, did you make that recommendation to the government?
I believe it would have been December if my mind serves me right.
Okay. Well then, Minister, the decision to halt those flights, I mean, that announcement was made on January 26th. So there seems to be a gap.
What hangs on that?
Say again?
What hangs on that from your standpoint?
Well, the question that everyone is asking is why weren't these flights stopped sooner? I mean, that has been a main issue throughout the last 3 months. Why weren't these flights stopped sooner? Now we are seeing that persons who have arrived in Antigua and Barbuda are in a vulnerable situation, have been apparently exploited by persons, people smugglers, if you want to call them that, and persons are coming back to the question, why did we not stop these flights sooner? So I've just heard the Chief Immigration Officer say that perhaps a recommendation would have been made sometime at maybe the end of December.
Well, despite the clarification, I still note that you said that persons were exploiting them. And I don't know if that can hold if persons willfully took the opportunity to embark on this particular initiative. What you're missing out on is that in the interim, we had a general elections and we had a question of where we were. So at the time when this matter came to the attention of the government, no further permission would have been granted for any flights to arrive here. But in respect of once the elections was over and the government was faced fully, and I'm perhaps maybe Commander Benjamin could help out when we had the first notice from Caribbean Impacts, but at that particular point in time, we took a decision. So I don't know that anything else hung on it. There was no further harm done after the last flight that we would have had around December 27th, to the point where the government would have taken a decision that no mas, no more. But you continue to hold on the position that they were being exploited. I will argue converse to that and to indicate that there certainly was the ambition of persons who were coming here to move to other pastures. We would have seen from the Caribbean Impacts report that they got to as far as, in some instances, Suriname, and certainly there was a celebrated case in Trinidad as well, and certainly in Barbados. So it's all a confluence of events, and I think when the government took the decision, it took the decision in full knowledge that there was in fact how should I put it, a plot by individuals that they were going to exploit this air route that we had established. And so we made a determination to close the opportunity for any further exploitation of that particular air route. I noticed that the Chief of Immigration and the Chief of Defense Staff may wish to speak to this particular issue. Go right ahead.
Thank you, Minister. On a point of clarity, because we're dealing with death, I had made the comment that in terms of those who were deceased from the batch of Cameroonians, that it was 2 males and 1 female. I stand corrected. One of them seemed to have looked a little bit more feminine, but to be clear, to be frank, it is 3 males. So I just want to be clear. It's 3 males that are deceased. And the 3 males that are deceased are from the group in totality that were on the vessel. So not from the 16 that were saved, but from the bigger group itself. So I just wanted a clarity on that before, somebody thinks that there's a female, or one of the Cameroonians would have thought that, oh my goodness, there's a female that would have passed and possibly could have been a family member. So I just want to clarify, it is not 1 female and 2 males. It is 3 males that have been declared deceased. Thank you.
Before I ask my third question, I just wanted to get a little bit of clarity from you, Minister, on the last answer, which is, you said the 27th. You're saying the last flight came in on December 27th.
The last flight, I mean, I think the immigration could give an absolute date, 29th.
Of December.
Correct.
So there were no additional charter flights bringing West Africans in January at all.
That's correct.
Okay.
And let me further clarify that, that the approval that was granted was for an arrival and a return to pickup. And what we did determine and on the 26th of January, as you inferred, was that we will leave the opportunity open for flights to return to pickup, but that there will be no more influx, there will be no more ingression in the state from these charter flights.
Okay. And my final question on this round is, it's hard to choose, filled up like 4 pages. You mentioned that there was a second operator. Sorry, you mentioned there was a second operator. And I've been a bit confused about this. Not that I'm doubting the existence of a second operator, but I want to clarify whether or not the government's position is that this second operator is the operator who is responsible for stranding the 600 plus persons. And if the government is saying that Antigua Airways had no part in that. For instance, when the chief immigration officer spoke, she actually referred to Antigua Airways when she spoke to the persons who are now in St. Kitts. So I'm trying to get some clarity as to what the government's position is. Basically the question, did Antigua Airways have a role, yes or no, in stranding some of the 600 and X number of persons who are here now?
Short answer is yes, but we still maintain that there was a second operator who had no prior engagement with the government, but would have exploited the opportunity for establishing a charter because of the air route that had already been established between Nigeria and Antigua. And so that remains the position of the government, but I think Ms. Yearwood can give some further clarity as to the persons who have now been discovered as part of the further transmigration that is taking place, whether or not they are persons from the original Antigua Airways flight that had remained in Antigua, whether or not they have now found themselves in this particular part of consideration.
Thank you, Minister. Yes, I was able to confirm earlier that those Cameroonians who are now in St. Kitts were from the Antigua Airways batch that came in on the 22nd of December, in between the 27th to the 29th of December. Thank you.
Thank you, Myrtle Bruno, ZDK News. Now, Commissioner, this question would be for you. In terms of the vessel being reported missing, now a lot of planning would have gone into that operation which took place on Tuesday. Is the police considering that this was the purpose of the vessel being in Antigua in the first place?
We haven't made that final determination yet. As indicated from the description of the vessel, it's a normal fishing vessel. So we have made that determination that it came particularly for an event like that.
Okay. This would be for the minister. Just to piggyback on what you mentioned earlier about flights to repatriate those who wish to return, what is the status of that operation?
The government had outlined since January that we made the 2 options available for the persons who remained. If they would wish to go back home, we would certainly organize a one-way charter for them to so do, and it still remains a commitment. We reiterated that position even yesterday. So for persons who find themselves still feeling uncomfortable about the hospitality within the environment, if they would wish to go back home, yes, we will still make that arrangement. In fact, we have asked immigration in their discourses with them over the coming days with the IMO to establish in point of fact how many persons would wish to go back, and we will still facilitate that. To the extent that the other option that we made in terms of facilitating them lawfully to remain in the jurisdiction, that is still open to them. And to the extent that there are some persons who have made a determination that despite the risk, that the opportunity still exists for them to do what seemed to be the matter of consideration at this point in time, then we have no control over that, only to say that we would hope that the presence of the IMO and the UNHCR, that a more fulsome outcome could become of this, and that we will act on the advice of IMO and UNHCR in terms of how we facilitate and dispense with the concern that caused them to move from their home base in the first instance.
So since the government made the offer to today, no individual have come forward to claim that they wish to be repatriated?
I will ask Ms. Yearwood to respond to that, because they're the contact in that respect of that.
Thank you, Minister. From having discussions with the team that's actually on the ground, to date, we have not received any Cameroonian or West African come to the Department of Immigration to advise they wish to be repatriated.
Okay. My final question, will the survivors be repatriated to Antigua? Will they be brought back here, or what's going to happen to them? I'm not sure who's...
It's a question of the jurisdiction. I think at the moment where they are in St. Kitts, that they fall under the legal jurisdiction of St. Kitts. And in terms of what they do, I think that there's going to be some collaboration between states. And we have the UNHCR, we have IMO here, and St. Kitts is certainly a friendly government. And if they make a determination that they would wish for us to receive them, I suppose we have an obligation to receive them back and to you know, go from there. But I don't know if law enforcement would wish to speak further to this. Commissioner Rodney?
No, as I say, it's a jurisdiction issue. They are presently in St. Kitts jurisdiction, and they will take care of most of the activities that will be happening right now. In terms of the investigation part, the criminal investigation, if there are individuals among the 14 who were part of the plan to take them there, they will be investigating that, and that's what they're doing this morning. They are doing some interviews with them. In terms on the immigration part, the Chief Immigration Officer, Ms. Hughes, on that and is also handling that aspect. So, but there would have to be some collaboration between the two states, and we will know where do we go from there.
Alicia George, Island Press Box. Firstly, I need a bit of clarification on the second charter. I'm confused. I hope I'm not the only one. How does a second charter arrive in Antigua under the Antigua Airways banner? The Antigua Airways charter flight has its banner. How does a second flight arrive, and does it not raise any flags with immigration, law enforcement? Some clarification, please.
I'm going to invite Ms. Yearwood to address that.
The only part I can answer to that is your question as it relates to immigration. Immigration is solely responsible for processing the passengers off of any flight. So whether or not it's a commercial flight, it's a charter flight, immigration's mandate is anybody coming off of that, whether your crew or your passengers, to process them. And on all of the consecutive dates from when was it, the 1st of November, from the inaugural flight down to the last flight being the 29th, that is exactly what immigration did. Ensured that we know where it is that you're staying, that you filled out your ED cards, that you have the right documentation to enter Antigua and Barbuda. But with respect to anything outside of that, arrangements of flights, that would not be my jurisdiction. So I would yield to the Honorable Minister with that one.
Right, and let me give some further clarity to this particular matter. The establishment of the route between Nigeria and Antigua, an air services agreement, is what facilitates the movement of aircraft, movement of airlift between the two jurisdictions. And the administrative body, or the regulatory body that would normally facilitate it from that point, would be the Civil Aviation Authority. We do not have an officer from the Civil Aviation or from the Ministry of Civil Aviation available to determine how the request for an establishment of a second charter on that particular route was in fact approved. I will give the assurance that we can facilitate that question through the requisite authority. They're not here to give an answer to that, but it would have been through the establishment of the air route and the approval that would have been sought and granted by civil aviation to allow that second aircraft to arrive here.
Yeah, just to note, on 3 different occasions, I made contact with ECA. I spoke to 2 persons. I sent them emails. I called, hoping to get an interview. I actually said, well, if I can't get an interview, am I able to go through the process using the Freedom of Information Act? Unfortunately, we don't have an active commissioner, so I don't know how I'm supposed to go about getting that information otherwise. But if you could get that to us, that would be great. My other question is,
Let me clarify that in the absence of the Information Commissioner, my office, which is stated in the Act, will be able to facilitate you having access to that information.
Can you provide
I'll
us?
be prepared to assist you.
Can you provide us with information as to how we can?
I'll be prepared to assist you in getting the information
Okay,
that you want.
thanks. My other question is, does the government take any responsibility at all as to what happened on Tuesday?
The government takes no responsibility in any persons going out on a particular venture, having calculated the risk, and to make any decision on their own. This is a matter totally having regard to the fact that they were here, they were given hospice, and the government has made no hostile overtures toward these persons. The fact that they, on their own volition, seemingly, would have embarked on this initiative, the government can take no responsibility for what took place.
Okay. All right. I think my next question is for Ms. Yearwood. Just before I ask clarification, you said that there were not 600 or as many migrants here still?
Correct.
So the figure 637, where did that come from?
That would have been a figure that would have been provided at a different time. Today's figure, and from the intelligence that has been gathered from our intel unit, would state that it is decreased from 600. I would say about in the region of 300.
Okay, so
north,
that's
north of 350. Am I?
So can we account for
I
those?
apologize. I'm being directed of 400, north of 400.
400.
Yes.
Can we account for where those 237 other people went? And are we by any chance tracking the migrants, monitoring them? I don't know if that's the job of immigration or another department.
Okay, no, that wouldn't be the job of immigration, but I think I understand the question you're trying to ask. Immigration would be able to trace who has left the country through an official port of entry. So whether that's from the seaport or the airport, once you go through any of those ports, you're going to have what is called a crossing on our border management system. So if we check the system, which is currently being done, but as I alluded to earlier, it is not an easy task because we have to cross-check with the buyer page manually. So we can check that and say, okay, Jane Doe or whomever was on a flight going to St. Kitts or going to Dominica, what immigration, and I would believe I would be correct in saying not just immigration, but any other entity at this press conference, we wouldn't be able to directly say how many are here based on the fact that if it is that they left illegally, that's not going to be in our system. That's not going to be able to pick up on our border management system. So to answer your question, the number is not going to be accurate. It cannot be accurate unless it's coming from the border management system.
That's fine. But so in other words, it's fair to say that the 200 plus people who are no longer in Antigua left Antigua lawfully.
Let me bring
seeing that you know the roundabout number.
Let me try and help. The figure of 637 was disclosed in a similar forum like this once we had the engagement with the immigration officials. The total number of persons that would have come in the 4 flights would have been in the order of 800 to 900, and based on those who would have left on the return leg of those flights, at the time of the assessment, it was determined that some 600 and odd persons would have remained here. Based on further contact, it perhaps maybe is within the realm of logic to determine if there are less than 600 persons here, it would mean that there may have been other, and this is speculative, other successful unauthorized extraction from the jurisdiction. Pardon? Well, if they were legal, the border management system would be able to track them, which is what I think Ms. Yearwood is saying.
So that's what I was asking essentially. Since they have a ballpark figure, is it to assume that the 200 plus left legally?
Look, what we can say is that we have the ingression. We know how many persons came here on the 4 flights. We are having now to come up, and I suppose some of this would come out of our engagement with the IMO and UNHCR, to be able to establish in point of fact how many persons do we have in the jurisdiction and how do we account for it. Presumably this voyage or this journey went horribly wrong, but it is within the realm of possibility that perhaps maybe surreptitiously more unauthorized vessels would have transported persons from this jurisdiction under the radar unbeknownst to law enforcement officials. It is quite likely that this event that had taken place, had there not been the SOS condition that came out on Tuesday morning, early Tuesday morning, they may well have arrived in other jurisdictions without the knowledge, because of the porosity of the borders and because of the lack of information available to law enforcement, that this may have taken place.
Just to note
And
that...
let me ask, sorry, Ms. Yearwood, to bring further clarification.
Thanks, Minister. So with respect to the last question, we can confirm that the 200 did leave legally. So we can confirm that from our border management system. The overall figure, as the Minister correctly mentioned, is comprised of those who were able to see from our border management system and also from a speculatory position of those who could have left through, other means that are not through the official ports of entry.
No problem. Just to note that the UN CHR or HCR I did speak with one of them, and they did say that the document they will be producing will be private, and so that will be shared with the government. Previously, Mr. Hurst said that they usually make those documents public. Is it that the government is going to share, perhaps not the most sensitive information, but some of the pertinent information with media when that document is released?
I just go as far as to say that this has been the pattern of this administration. There are times when information can be classified, and there are times when it is declassified. So the information goes through a whole process of ensuring that when we speak, we can speak with clarity. So the persons who are here around the table, many of them serve a part of the national security environment, the National Security Council. And so at the end of the day, insofar as this information is concerned, it will be treated as classified in the first instance. But once the picture has become clear to the government, we have an obligation to account to the citizens for the work that we do and for decisions that we make. And I can give you the assurance that insofar as the information remains unclassified, it will be shared with the public. Or becomes unclassified, sorry, it will be shared with the public.
Good morning to the roundtable and my media colleagues and the listening public. My name is Makeda Antonio, and I'm representing Antigua.news this morning. My first question I'm going to put to Minister Nicholas. Sir, can you expand on the emergence of this migration issue as a regional issue, or rather on a regional scale, and the risks that are associated with future attempts of this kind, not only by the West Africans who are here, but by anyone really seeking to leave our shores on illegal conditions?
I'm going to defer that question to Commander Benjamin, because I think based on the brief that Cabinet had yesterday, both himself and the other law enforcement officials did advise the Cabinet as to how extensive these border migration issues have been taking place over the years.
Thank you. What we are seeing currently is being observed not only here in Antigua and Barbuda, but based on the last meeting of the Regional Security Systems Council, has been observed across the RSS sub-region, that is the islands from Barbados to the south, all the way up to St. Kitts, inclusive of St. Vincent, St. Lucia, Grenada, Dominica, Antigua, Barbuda, and St. Kitts Nevis. And so there's a notable trend as to the movement of peoples from outside and within the region through unauthorized channels. And so it is noted, the information that was discussed and presented before Cabinet is that within particularly the period since around 2021, and I was reminded that this has been going on long before, there's a notable trend of movements using maritime means to travel throughout the region and to pursue, if you want to call it, greener pastures. So there is an ongoing movement. There is an ongoing movement that is suggested, that is facilitated by the local maritime resources across our sub-region, moving peoples for through whatever means and for the exchange of whatever resources.
Okay, thank you so much. And my next question, will regional bodies such as the OECS and or CARICOM be involved in setting a policy regarding this migration, or as we now see, this refugee issue?
I am not in a position to call it a refugee issue, but obviously there is a migration and movement of peoples. As mentioned, the regional security system, which is the umbrella agency within this sub-region, has discussed and is discussing this matter extensively. And discussion is happening at the level of the security chiefs as well as the ministers responsible for national security to find ways to not only mitigate but to try and resolve the issues that are confronting us presently. As mentioned before, we are in a resource-constrained environment, and so it is through collaboration that we're able to find some resolution of these. There is obviously a broader issue across the broader region, and I will defer to those who can speak to what may be happening at the CARICOM level in terms of finding possible solutions to this.
Just to indicate that at the CARICOM level, as a part of the Implementation Agency for Crime and Security impacts, that it is an observation that has been made at the regional level, and there is a policy that seeks to address issues of migration within the region. We note that there have been instances of movement of people, guns, drugs in certain aspects and certain places within the wider region. And so it has always been an issue. Of course, that is an area that requires resources, requires intelligence, requires coordination, and requires quite a bit of organization. And our people also need not to be facilitating that sort of development. So it's a multifaceted issue that requires a holistic approach, and at the CARICOM impacts level, there is a recognition of that, and efforts continue to harmonize the region's security apparatus to ensure that the region remains a zone of what we refer to as peace.
I think to continue along that same vein, and I like that question because it's a concern across not just within our sub-region, but last week the Interpol Regional Conference that was held in Chile, which comprises countries from Canada down to Argentina, and that was one of the topics of discussion as to the incidence of migrant smuggling and that type of movement within the region. So it's a problem not only within our sub-region, but it was a part of the discussion as to how do we address this problem, because it's happening down in South America, Latin America, up North America, and within the Caribbean seas. So it is something that all law enforcement agencies across the region is looking at so that we can address the problem.
I'm certain that you would have seen on television, on the news, in relation to the border situation between Mexico and the US and how that continues to evolve, and the movement of persons throughout South America, Central America, and moving straight up. So it's a continuous issue that really requires, and even our great northern neighbors who have many more resources than we do are also facing a particular challenge. Then it requires significant resources, coordination, manpower, to be able to get a proper handle on that. And that has been ongoing for quite a number of years. And where there's a disparity within the development of countries, whether or not one country is perceived to be a developed country and another perceived to be an underdeveloped country or third world, then you're going to see movement of people trying to position themselves to be in a better position in life.
Okay, that was my last question. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks much. Thanks, my colleagues. Very quickly, let's try to see if, in fact, we may not have time to do another go around. We'll see. We'll see. Let's see how quickly we can ask these ones. To the head table, specifically to the security forces, perhaps to the commissioner and to the chief of defense staff. What do the laws of the country say in relation to the migrant smuggling? So what if the two Antiguans were part of it? What if the investigations show they were part of it? And what if this gentleman who brought the boat from Guadeloupe, what if he were found to have been complicit? What do our laws say in relation to the penalty? Because obviously it must be punitive enough to be a deterrent.
In terms of the fine and confinement, I do not have it before me, but we have a Migrant Smuggling Act in Antigua that came into effect somewhere around 2013, and then in 2015 it was amended so that you can have trials at the summary level, which is magistrate court, and also at the high court level. The fines are very steep. I think in some cases you might have fines up to $500,000 and 5 years imprisonment. So we have the legislation that we can pursue those matters before the court where anyone is involved in migrant smuggling. We also have legislation that deals with human trafficking. The two pieces of legislation came about around the same time, and the amendments were made to both of them. So we have the legislation in place in Antigua to handle whether it is human trafficking or it is migrant smuggling. In this case, at the initial stage, we are looking at a migrant smuggling case in terms of moving persons from one jurisdiction to the next, and that is where the focus of our investigation is. In terms of the gentleman from Guadeloupe, as I said, at this stage we are still doing interviews with him in terms of if he broke any law, because he came in, and as you heard from the controller of custom, he did do his clearance when he came. So he came in on the 25th and he made that clearance that he came here on his fishing boat. He gave the full description, the same description that I have, the same description customs have. So legally, I believe he came in here. In terms of his intent, that for investigators to determine what was the purpose, if it was just a normal fishing trip or if it was just something else. But that is for us to investigate. But in terms of the legislation, we have them, and that is what we would use to focus our investigations on.
Let me stay with the security forces from the second question. Do we know how much, in terms of the intelligence, do we know how much was paid by the migrants to have gone out on this vessel? Because the cabinet notes indicate that they paid allegedly a sum to whomever was connected to this. So do we know how much was that? And also, do we have definitive intelligence about whether or not there have been other such trips which may have been successful before?
Well, that's the nature of our investigations. If this was a one incident or there were several other incidents similar to that, and that is what we are doing right now. In terms of the price paid, that is still speculative, because we are hoping that at the end of the interviews with the survivors, because there was a number being floated around and we were trying to figure out where is that information is coming from. Also, the other information that is floating around that we have not confirmed as yet, how many persons were on the boat. We are hearing numbers, but in terms of a confirmation as to how many persons actually were on the boat, we're not sure as yet. So we are doing interviews with those survivors. We are doing interviews with the two Antiguan persons that were found on the boat. And I think subsequently we should be in a better position to determine how many persons actually were on the boat and the prices that was paid for the trip.
Just a follow-up. Because we now know that that's the situation, I heard Colonel Benjamin talk about the fact that there would be efforts to improve the surveillance and improve the capabilities with assets, land, air, and possibly sea assets. Can you confirm and can you assure the public that that is being done immediately? Because since we now know that this has happened, there could possibly be another vessel being readied right now for to take to the water. So can you say that there has been urgent, expeditious action by the authorities to ensure that we improve surveillance?
The answer is yes, short answer. There is an ongoing process that is happening now. Cabinet has directed the agencies seated here to improve on the issue of collaboration and coordination, particularly the information sharing piece. But there is also a very deliberate process to acquire the necessary sensors as well as surface assets to support this. For those who are in the maritime environment, you would appreciate that this is a very long and technical process. We've actually had a team on the ground who have done an assessment both here in Antigua and Barbuda, looking at the posting and positioning of radars to support the sensor piece. We have also begun a process of acquisition of what may be referred to as drones to support the aerial surveillance piece as well. We have also started the discussions. I recently returned from a trip where we looked at the acquisition of a vessel to support the surface piece. And we have, as you are all aware, we have already acquired an aircraft and is in the process of a second one to support the aerial surveillance piece. So there is a process that is going on to build capacity to support the overall piece, but the biggest part of it for us is the collaboration and coordination piece, which we are doing and have been mandated to do more of by the Cabinet of Antigua and Barbuda.
A final question, perhaps to Minister Nicholas first, and then he could then delegate to the other members of the security forces. One, in relation to asylum claims, have any definitive asylum claims come in from any of the West Africans who are here in the country? And two, is the government going to look at taking some sort of action or seeking further clarity from High Fly or whichever this other actor was, which played a part in this effort? Because obviously that actor was a malign actor and would have contributed to the challenges that are here. So is the government looking to get that actor, High Fly or whichever it is, to be brought to book, to be held to account for what it was able to do?
The first question was related to whether or not we have had any requests for asylum. None to the knowledge of myself or the Cabinet, and I've gotten confirmation with an audibly head from the members of the immigration who are in the audience, and the immigration department who are in the audience. Insofar as the other actor, High Fly, I don't know, even by the widest stretch of the imagination, if we can determine that there has been anything unlawful that was done with respect to the insertion of the other charter. If in fact that the air route was established, and if in fact that they made an application to land a charter aircraft here, and that was done on the lawful means, there may have been the surreptitious objective of exploiting the route that was established to facilitate migration of persons, willful migration of persons. I don't know that we could indicate, could stretch the imagination to say that anything unlawful was done. As I've said before, the issue here is that from a pioneering status in terms of trying to establish this air bridge between West Africa and the Caribbean, we are now at the discovery point in terms of how this particular route was exploited. And to that extent, we have learned from it, so we have closed the opportunity for it to recur. And at the next phase, we would have to look at certain of the border entry requirements that we would have to put in place. Certainly in our engagement with the Africa Exim Bank, they made it clear to us that they're interested in seeing the further commercial integration of what they consider to be the sixth border of Africa, which is the Caribbean. There were partnership agreements signed recently between us and they, and between several member states of CARICOM and the Africa Exim Bank. And so clearly this sets up the future for this type of commercial, social, cultural engagement with Africa, and an air bridge is certainly going to be required to facilitate that. What we can, however, say is that what needs to accompany that is further intelligence it came out in the wash when we were in discussion with the immigration department that even within our own Caribbean, for them to be able to conduct their due diligence with migrants, and let me be specific, we have the CARICOM region in which we have, to an extent, a measure of free movement. We've had the conversation recently about work permits for removal of the requirement for work permits for CARICOM nationals, and we have also included the Dominican Republic. But we've understood from the immigration officials in consultation that the level of, that they still have to do a level of scrutiny of these individuals, and the intelligence that is required for them to be able to have the bona fides or the confidence to describe an immigrant from the Dominican Republic. It requires a different effort than to, let's say, to do that for someone from St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Similarly, if we're going to have future engagements with Nigeria and with that air bridge between Nigeria and the Caribbean, it means that we must learn from this experience and to be able to establish other points of intelligence that will allow us to be able to put the filter in, such that when persons are moving from those jurisdictions in Nigeria and near Nigeria, that by the time they arrive here, our immigration system should be fortified enough that gives us the confidence to ensure that we can eliminate bad actors and some of these nefarious activities. But at this stage, I think it would be injudicious for us to make a determination that there is any need to pursue high fly for anything that it may have just been inadvertent. And that is the position of the government at this stage.
All right, pretty much that's the end of our questions, Minister. Thank you so much to yourself, and let's go back over to yourself to for your quick closing comments, and I'll ask if you possibly could give each of the members of the head table a minute to have their closing comments as well. Thanks.
Let me invite them so to do first, and then I will close with my comments. I'll start with the lady on the left, and then we'll move up the chain.
Thank you. With respect to closing comments from immigration, as I mentioned earlier, I guess the crux of the matter, or how we go forward, will be heavily dependent on the assistance that we'll be getting from the international bodies. As you heard from the Honorable Minister, I believe they are here today, and we should be meeting with them tomorrow to start the ball rolling. I know that there was a question, and I don't think I answered it, with respect to if we know the whereabouts of the Africans. And what I can say with that is you're not going to know, whether it's Africans or any non-national that is here in Antigua and Barbuda, you're never going to know at any given time where they are in actuality. And the reason being is because sometimes they move from the home. So you would have come in, you'd have written on your ED card that I'm staying at Garfield's Villa. And then after a while, you may decide, I don't like the accommodation at Garfield's Villa, so now I'm going to move and I'm going to go to a different location. And when you move from that different location, that is not something that immigration is easily informed of. And so with the Africans, to put it in short, we have a team in place that has been led by our intel unit here at immigration. And so we have an idea of what zones they are in, which accommodations that they are at. But like I said, this is fluid. So what I would have been informed of yesterday of where they would be could easily change this morning. And the reason I said it changes is based on, preference. Some might say, and we have been hearing this, oh, the rent is a little too exorbitant at this place, or my fee that I have to pay for my upkeep is too exorbitant, so I'm now going to move to more economical accommodation. But there is a hub, there is a team in place, and I can confidently say that at any given time, and when the international bodies come, and they do ask, well, where are they situated, that we'll be able to give an answer and to show them the information that we have retrieved on the ground. Lastly, I would share the same sentiments that Colonel Croft mentioned earlier. The severity, the basis is that life has been lost. And I know that there are a lot of allegations and aspersions being casted right now, but I need the public to acknowledge that this is a fluid situation, and this is something that is not going to be done just by one entity, namely immigration. All of us need to do our part, and we are very confident and we are willing to do that. You heard me speak earlier about what is needed, which is resources. Some of these are in our hand or in our responsibility, but there are things that are outside of our responsibility. So I'm very grateful that in going forward, we have a better understanding individually and collectively what is needed, not just with Antigua, but reaching out to our counterparts regionally and internationally, the equipment that is needed. You would have heard from Colonel Benjamin in particular of the assets from land and sea that his department in particular would need to basically fight what is happening with our porous borders. So I would end with saying thank you to the media houses. Thank you, Honorable Minister, for having us here to send some clarity. If there is any information that the public wishes to inform immigration of, then obviously we will provide a number for that to be channeled through. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. First and foremost, I'd like to reiterate the point that the Antigua Barbuda Defense Force, through its various components, the Coast Guard and the Air Wing, continues to operate in pursuit of resolution of this issue. There's an ongoing search and rescue, in this case, search and recovery case that is going, and we will continue to pursue that until such time as a formal decision is made to withdraw from the current area. I will proceed to say that we will pursue every agency, every area of collaboration and coordination to ensure that we can provide the best services for Antigua and Barbuda, and by extension supporting the region and making sure this region remains safe. Finally, I think it would be most appropriate to express our condolences to the families of those who have been lost, and we look forward to a timely resolution of this particular issue.
I'd like to say on behalf of the Royal Police Force of Antigua and Barbuda that our main mandate is always to protect lives and property, and the loss of life is very sad to us. So we are saddened by the loss that we had in this incident. We want to use the opportunity to continue to encourage the public to know that it is a very risky behavior to participate into anything like migrant smuggling, and we can see the end result. And we want to encourage persons to pay attention to the laws of the land. It's against the law to participate in any form of migrant smuggling, and we would continue to share that information with the general public. So it's not only illegal, but it's also a high-risk activity. In terms of our commitment, we are committed to work with our local partners, our regional partners, and yes, our international partners as we investigate the circumstances of this case. And we want to use this opportunity to appeal to the general public to provide any information that can assist us. We also want to appeal to the general public to encourage persons that they know of that are might prone to participate in incidents like that to desist from those type of activities. There are a number of mechanisms in place that can assist migrants in Antigua and Barbuda, and we should encourage persons to use that route in terms of being exploited by other persons just for, financial reward. So we are committed, and we will continue with the investigation, and whatever information that is out there that can assist us, we are open to receive that information so we can bring some form of closure, but also to prevent incidents like that happening, and those persons who are responsible for them to be held accountable for their actions.
Thank you very much. I think it is important that in the overall scheme of things, we are able to look at lessons learned and determine how do we move forward. What is it that we can do differently in ensuring that we mitigate against the sort of impact that would have occurred under these circumstances? We look at the strategic level, we look at the policymakers level, we look at the national level, we look at the law enforcement level and determine what can be done differently. And so there are a number of lessons learned as we continue to look at and do an analysis of the various situations and circumstances that have unfolded with respect to this. One of those particular areas is in the area of improved coordination, cooperation, information sharing. While we understand that there are limitations in terms of resources and assets to be able to respond, I think fundamentally that one of the critical components is to ensure that there is improved collaboration, coordination amongst the various stakeholders that need to be there. There is also a need to appeal to the public in terms of, I borrow the phrase, if you see something, say something. And so there is that appeal because the public is aware of what is happening and they can make a difference in terms of the end result of what has happened. And so there is that appeal to participate in safeguarding your country, in safeguarding the way of life that we enjoy as a people, to be welcoming to guests and visitors, but to understand that there is a need to ensure that we have to protect what we have grown accustomed to, what we have fought over the years to develop, and to recognize that as a people, as a nation, there is lots for which we ought to be thankful. And while I note that there is going to always be an improved way of doing something, if we were to really introspect, we can feel satisfied in terms of the standards of what we have been able to achieve, and we need to continue on that journey to greater efficiency and effectiveness in the way we do things and how we do things. At the end, we need to be our brother's keeper. We need to be in a position to look out for our neighbors. And as we look at where we are as a people and where we would like to be, what is it that we would want to do? And how do we get where we need to go in a efficacious manner, in a manner that is like a Samaritan, not leaving the other person by the side of the road, but lending a helping hand to those who would need that hand, and ensure that as a people, as a movement, that we can do better and we can ensure that we improve on the manner. Again, I just want to extend the condolences on the passing of those who would have to the family of those who have passed. And I can say that, just one last thing, that every predicate offense for migrant smuggling leads to a money laundering offense. And so in the overall scheme of things, we will be partnering very closely with the police department in terms of their investigations to hold individuals accountable to those who would have been behind the scenes facilitating, organizing, supporting financially or otherwise the activities that would have led and that would have resulted in this tragic incident. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Customs Antigua and Barbuda stands firmly with the colleague law enforcement agencies, ensuring that our borders are secure, safe, living to the true motto of the customs, secure and serve. We really empathize with the families that have lost their loved ones. Life is so precious. Once life is lost, everything is lost. Whatever we do is of, it comes to a naught. As my colleagues have alluded, collaboration, coordination, and information sharing, these are the key words which we were listening for a long time, but still we have not yet reached to that stage where we have a perfect blend of things in terms of all the departments, all the law enforcement agencies coming together Information sharing is one aspect, but timely information sharing is another aspect. And we need to be proactive. And also I want to tell one thing to my brothers and sisters who are listening in the country of Antigua and Barbuda, that national security is not the only business of law enforcement agencies. It is business of everyone. It affects all of us. So if you see something, say something. If you hear something, just share it, so that proactively your servants, the law enforcement agencies, can act proactively and prevent these mishaps. And again, I reiterate that Customs Antigua and Barbuda is resolved and determined to work with all colleague law enforcement agencies to ensure that we have a secure and happy nation. Thank you.
And my final comments is only to overall, as we come to the end of this proceedings, this is a very somber moment as we reflect on not only what has gone wrong, but on the tragic loss of life as we know it. So far, 3 persons, but as you would have heard from Commander Benjamin, that it's a search and recovery at this stage, given the length of time that has transpired. And so the possibility exists that there would be an account of more loss of life in these circumstances. So it's a very somber moment. And I hereby extend the condolences on behalf of the Cabinet and Government of Antigua and Barbuda to the bereaved families. And to reiterate once again that it is in the sinews of this administration to give a public account of its actions and the decisions that we take on an ongoing basis, and as immediate as we can do. Yesterday we would have had a similar engagement in the Cabinet, and here we are, and it is all available for the public now to absorb and to deliberate and to determine whether or not you're satisfied that we remain transparent in this process. We know that we are, and I want to thank each and every one of the media houses to have asked your probing questions, and hopefully it satisfies the requirement for your discerning publics as well. And I look forward, as I want to do, to a future engagement. Thank you very much for your attendance here this morning.
Well, thanks to you as well, Minister Nicholas. Minister Nicholas is Minister for Information Communications Technology, Public Utilities and Energy. We thank his, all of the members who joined him on the head table, of course, the heads of the security forces and the country's security architecture. We thank my colleagues, Robert Emmanuel from Observer Media, independent journalist Zoe Carlton, Alicia George from Island Press Box. There is Makeda Antonio from Antigua.news, Mr. Barnes, Everton Barnes from Pointville, and there is the great Kieran Murdoch from Twin Island Media, as well as Myrtle Bruno from ZDK. We thank all of our colleagues, of course, who would have joined us. Of course, a special post-cabinet media briefing today, coming to you from the Sir John E. St. Louis Finance and Conference Center, and of course an extended one because of the situation with the boat tragedy, which happened on Tuesday. I'm Garfield Burford on behalf of the entire team here at ABS who brought this to you. Very good morning. Thank you so much for joining us.